what happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites. So that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused the philosopher Nietzsche, who is the philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was the same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power in the name of the Christian idea of love. Now we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
So we are recording. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. This is yet another addition to discussions outside of the textbook. And today I'm joined with a couple of colleagues from my department that I teach in here at South Texas College, Mr. Rene Rios. And then we are delighted to have a philosopher with us, Christopher Nelson. So why don't you guys just introduce yourselves, and then we'll go from there. I'll set up what we're about to discuss, and then we'll have a little bit of fun with this discussion.
Sure. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invite, Mr. Sean. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Rene Rios. I've been with the department for several years now. So I'm from the Valley originally, and I got earned my bachelor's degree in history from Pan American University, and then returned to UTPA and earned the master's in 2011. And my thesis was specialized, or at least looked at legal history, Valley legal history specifically, and I looked at the composition of juries and jury pools in Hidalgo County from 1950 to about 1960. So.
Excellent.
All right, and I'm Chris Nelson. I currently serve as the Dean for the Division of Liberal Arts, which oversees all of the arts and humanities programs, including history. In my previous life, I was a professor of philosophy, specializing in 19th century philosophy and the philosophy of religion. So social and political philosophy was never my wheelhouse. I'm about good enough at it to teach the intro level course. But and as dean, I should note I'm also, I think, the acting chief censor of all in the liberal arts division.
Yeah, I'm Sean Kennedy, even though it says Robert Kennedy. Robert's just my legal name, but I go by Sean. I've been teaching here at STC for going on about 17 years. I'm from Northern California, where I attended university at CSU Chico and earned a master's degree, basically specializing in U.S. history writ large, with a focus on race relations, the nadir of race relations post Reconstruction. And I just typically teach the survey courses here, History 1301 and 1302. So shout out to all of my students that happen to be here. And I will have a sign-in sheet at the end for any student that is here. But looks like this will be recorded, and it is being recorded. And I will have this distributed to anybody out there that would be interested in sharing it with students that were unable to attend, as well as faculty. Okay, yeah, what we are discussing today is a book right here. Let me get it into the script. You can't really see it because, oh, there we go. on Tyranny by Professor Timothy Snyder. You see how small it is. This is probably a very unusual amount of text that this professor typically produces. He is basically specializes in Eastern European 20th century history, where he focused on authoritarian regimes. For my money, this is the better version of the book. It's a graphic novel, kind of fun. It's got pictures in it. So if you like pictures and cartoons, as well as the text, it adds some further dimension to it. But this is a book that's provides 20 lessons from the 20th century, examining the propensity of authoritarianism to rise within societies. And we are going to be discussing the first two lessons in this, and I'm anticipating this to be a series of podcasts where we will examine all 20 lessons as the days go on. So the lessons that we're taking a look at is the first lesson is do not obey in advance, right? And so this lesson explores the perils of preemptive compliance with oppressive governments, highlighting how authoritarian regimes gain power democratically, bolstered by voluntary support, right? So it's that might be counter to what one might expect in a text like this, but Professor Snyder is very much hitting it right on the head right there. Authoritarian regimes have no power unless the people consent to it. And so we'll explore that as we go forward. And the second lesson we'll be exploring is defend institutions. And so this lesson emphasizes the vital role of active participation in defending our republic's institutions. So that's something else we will be exploring as well. So if you guys will indulge me, I thought we would start off, because a lot of this text deals, and quite obviously so, with one of the greatest institutions we have, the Constitution. And so this is something that my students, we have been examining for the last 4 classes in the last couple of weeks. And before we ever discuss it, I always invite people to participate in the pledge for the Constitution. So you're free to join me, or you're just free to witness me, but I'm going to freely give my pledge to it. So, and let me put it into the chat so everybody has access to it. There we go. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I take this obligation freely without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. So thought I would start off with that. And typically we think of this as a pledge just for public officials or people in the armed services. And probably just in the armed services, we kind of think of this. And so there is this probably an assumption that this is a oath that somebody takes up who is willing to either die or kill for the document. Certainly that is the case, but there are many other ways of defending this institution and this document. The first is what we're doing today. We are informing ourselves. We're informing ourselves about why this institution is worth defending. And from there, we can contemplate other ways of defending it beyond what one might assume. But let us begin going forward. So we could also rope in the prologue of this text. And shoot, my glasses broke, so I'll have to strain here. But this is to primarily to both Chris and Renee, but absolutely anybody out there right now can participate in the chat. And if you so desire, you can also open up your mic and participate as well. But let's just start this question off as a springboard, and we can go from there. Snyder notes that Aristotle warned about inequality, leading to instability, and Plato believed demagogues exploit free speech to become tyrants. How do these ancient philosophical concerns resonate with contemporary discussions about the vulnerabilities of democratic systems, particularly in light of modern economic disparities and the spread of misinformation through our new media outlets?
You want to jump on that first, Renee? Or I'm glad we're starting with the prologue because this was actually going to be my first question.
No, I would say, Dr. Nelson, you go ahead because that's just a little bit more your philosophical wheelhouse, you know?
Yeah, because for Plato and Aristotle both, tyranny is diagnosed as a specific form of government. For Plato, it's the last in a series of five devolutions of good government. For Aristotle, it's the corrupted form of rule by one. And my question is, Snyder defines tyranny as and I've got it right here in the prologue, the usurpation of power by a single individual or group, or the circumvention of law by rulers for their own benefit. Now, that's largely consistent with how Plato and Aristotle both define tyranny. Tyranny is the rule of the one, uh, not for the common good, but for their own self-interest. But throughout the text, I mean, Snyder doesn't talk about tyranny so much as he seems to use it as an umbrella concept to capture all manner of things like totalitarianism, authoritarianism, dictatorships, fascism, communism. So I just wanted some clarity. The book's called On Tyranny, but do we have a clear sense of what Snyder means by tyranny? Does he mean all of those things? Are all of those instances or subsets of tyranny, or can they be rendered tyrannically?
I would think that Snyder's use is more, like you said, it's more umbrella like,
Right.
right? It seems to be kind of a catch-all, and then a bunch of other stuff can get lumped up underneath that to kind of frame a discussion of a larger concept that includes the subsets, right? The various subsets, anarchism, dictatorships, and so on, that you mentioned. At least that's kind of how I read the prologue, the first couple of chapters. And as you get a little bit deeper into the work itself, there's really not so much a emphasis on the concept or the idea of tyranny. It's just how working examples can manifest themselves in one catch-all phrase. That's
Right.
how I understand, or at least that's how I interpret the document itself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the
don't know.
one thing I would add to it too, that's something I think that absolutely concerned the framers of the Constitution was the tyranny of the demos as well, which I don't think
Right.
Snyder directly touches on, but kind of indirectly just through, especially through, we can probably see that in the first lesson, do not obey in advance. Um, but it's even more than that, right? There's, people and also in defending institutions, right? The requirement for defending or for maintaining institutions is the virtue of the people. And so if you have an ignorant, uneducated populace that idolizes the Constitution without ever examining it, this is fertile ground for people who are going to be susceptible to the concerns of Plato, people that will follow demagogues who just spew out platitudes that without ever defining the virtues behind those platitudes.
Right. So I think, I mean, what I see Snyder doing is, yeah, he's faithful to both Plato and Aristotle in one sense, but that he's also making a significant departure because for both Plato and Aristotle, and I'll try to do this quick. For Plato, there's five forms of government. Aristocracy, which is rule by the wise. As we lose sight of wisdom, that devolves into timocracy, which is ruled by those who are honored. We tend to honor wise people, so honor eventually becomes a proxy for wisdom, and then we're just ruled by the honorable. Then democracy, we realize people can buy honors, so wealth becomes a proxy for honor, and we devolve into an oligarchy ruled by the wealthy. And eventually, and if you hear some distant foreshadowing of Marx here, you have good ears. The wealthy are going to try to get wealthier, and they can only do that by increasing the amount of people in poverty and their level of poverty. Eventually, the masses will rise up and revolt, take power. Then we've got a democracy, which is ruled by popularity. And because popularity is so fickle and malleable, eventually, according to Plato, democracy will devolve into tyranny when a power-hungry asshole is able to gain enough popularity to take charge. But it's a single individual, a tyrant. Aristotle, a little more systematic. There's three generic types of government, depending on how many people are in charge, ruled by the one, ruled by a few, or ruled by the many. And there's a correct or true form and a perverse or corrupted form of each. So ruled by one, the correct form is monarchy, one ruler ruling for the common good of the people. The perverted form is tyranny, one ruler ruling for their self-interest. And in rule by the few, you've got aristocracy ruling for the common good, oligarchy ruling for their own interest. And in rule by the many, you've got polity, which is something like a constitutional republic. And according to Aristotle, the perverse or corrupted form is democracy, where it's just ruled by popularity. So what Plato and Aristotle both hold is that tyranny is essentially, it's a one-man show. And Snyder specifically departs from this. And I think Snyder believes and thinks it's possible to think not only of a tyrant, but of a tyrannical regime. You could have a tyranny of one, a tyranny of a few, or even a tyranny of the many. Does that, again, I'm about at the edge of my social and political wheelhouse, but does that feel about right?
Seems to. In my classes, I kind of try to make the distinction as we talk about, or at least discuss, the formation of the Republic in the aftermath of the Articles of Confederation. And then I try to make a distinction from moving out of revolution into the Articles. Articles of Confederation were kind of a reflection of the rhetoric of revolution, which is a decentralized form of national government where republics can be successful and can thrive if they are more localized in nature, hence a little bit closer to the people, however you define the people. But the document itself wasn't very successful because that decentralization couldn't compensate for why we needed a fairly robust national form of government. Hence, we moved to the Constitution, and then the Constitution is more that representative republic with elements of democracy, but folks are still, or at least individuals who meet property qualifications are still participating, but that didn't necessarily include everybody in the population. So, but that's, and then how we defend an institution and what we pick and choose on defending the institution kind of dictates, or at least it kind of determines, I think, it reflects what's going on in society overall. I think it's how we choose to define tyranny. There's the philosophical idea, there's the practical, there's the social, and then when you have tyranny as a form of one person, well, what happens when some of the institutions itself go along with the one tyrant, and how effective are the voices of the people to kind of suppress and tamp down institutions or try to check institutions from moving further and further and further or closer and closer to the actual tyrant himself or herself.
Yeah, and I think, and with that, to circle all the way back to Sean's original question, I think the interesting thing in both Plato and Aristotle, and maybe we hear this in Snyder as well, is we think, and he seems to set this up in terms of we've got tyranny over here and liberal democracy over here. These are polar opposites and at war with each other. But in both Plato and Aristotle, I mean, explicitly in Plato, and I think implicitly in Aristotle, both of them say it's actually democracy as a form of government that is most liable to devolve into tyranny.
Yeah, and to thank you, Renee, for bringing up the Articles of Confederation. I think the thing we have to keep in mind about the Articles of Confederation, one, it was a reflection of the historical experience of the colonies that had inadvertently, due to the circumstances of Great Britain or England at the time, not being able to govern their colonies in any way of effect, due to the fact that they really weren't ready to establish an empire relative to how Spain or Portugal were able to 100 years prior to even England getting involved in beginning to expand into the Western Hemisphere. And so you have 13 colonies, now states, under this thing called the United States of America. And they're trying to maintain the concept of self-government, and they're closely guarding state autonomy. And as such, they really did create a document, the Articles of Confederation, that really reflected the virtues of democracy, in the sense that they had proximity to power. They had eyes on those who had authority over them. And this was that. I think there's a common refrain to think that, okay, well, they just weren't ready for that yet. And then so we say, then we need to really have a more of a scrutiny on democratic institutions. And I think that sets us up. What I think gets lost is the fact that in the early republic, they were enduring not just a declining economy, they were enduring a collapsed economy with the post-war economy, coupled with the fact that England was, although they lost the war, they still had tremendous economic power, and they were, through Parliament, flooding the market with English goods. And the Articles of Confederation had no way of mitigating any of this. There was no central control to this. And so the Articles of Confederation lasted 6 years, and the thing that brought it down was Shays' Rebellion, which was a reflection of too much democracy, right? Yes, it was a violent uprising, but it very much was a product of democracy, Shays' Rebellion. Those farmers in Massachusetts were being taxed a third of their income within a collapsed economy in service of paying down Massachusetts war debt. And this was happening in all of the colonies. So they get together in 1787 in Philadelphia once again, and then they are going to basically throw out the Articles of Confederation and create the U.S. Constitution, which is concentrating power within a central government, not taking all of the power, but taking some of the power from the states. And this is greatly concerning to a lot of early Americans, which are going to be called anti-federalists. And the genius of the U.S. Constitution is it concedes, yes, I hear your concerns, anti-federalists. I hear your concerns, Patrick Henry and Sam Adams and George Mason, but we will concentrate that power within the federal government, and we'll deconcentrate it within 3 branches, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branch, and put these things in tension with each other. So not one individual or a class of people theoretically will ever be able to take control of the entire institution. And that began to suffice the concerns of the anti-federalists, but there was one last thing that they needed to do, which was to create the Bill of Rights, which was later ratified in 1791, after they accepted the word from James Madison, who worked tirelessly to get those amendments ratified 2 years after the Constitution was ratified itself. So this is jumping ahead, but I don't mind jumping into defending institutions. But I think what is very instructive about that lesson is what he points out is the demos were taught, just as from grade school, that we have this perfect institution, the Constitution, and it is this well-oiled machine. And he basically makes the argument that no, it requires the virtue of the people. The people need to be informed about it, and the people need to ensure that the checks and balances are in service to creating a government that checks not just the people in power, but the various concerns of the demos, as well as maintaining basically a viable marketplace for society writ large. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We can get into lesson 2 right now, or we can begin with do not obey in advance as well.
Yeah, I'm good either way, but as you were talking, it struck a memory in my mind. I think maybe from Hannah Arendt in On Revolutions, that there's a kind of way of viewing the Constitution as if it was a static, sacred document. You know, this is sacred text. And I think well advisedly, Arendt says, no, that's not the way to look at it. You have to look at it as a living document, a product of history. So part of defending it's a really dangerous business because we have to defend it as a living, revisable document and subject to any manner of revision, which, if you think a little bit, could get real scary.
Well, it's not scary. Real quick, just it's brief. It was designed to be brief and vague, and that was purposeful. I mean, you had this idealist like Thomas Jefferson who proposed, let's rip up the Constitution every 19 years. The living shouldn't be governed by the dead. But but I mean, there's a reason why this is endured now 249 and a half years now, going on 250. It is brief and vague, and probably the crowning achievement of it is implied powers. Congress has the power to create all laws which shall be necessary and proper to carry out its enumerated powers. And that's just a $50 word to say those powers that the federal government took from the states, which is to make war, levy taxes, and to regulate interstate commerce. Yeah, sorry, Renee, I cut you off. Yeah.
No, I was just about to say that if since lesson 2 kind of tells us to defend an institution, Snyder advises or suggests that we should choose an institution that we care about. And then he goes on to a laundry list, a court, a newspaper, a labor union, and so on. Well, he also mentions in his list a law. And if you choose to defend the Constitution as law, and then you run into that, what Dr. Nelson said, is that kind of that inherent tension from interpreting the Constitution when it was drafted in the 1780s, 1790s, and does it really hold up as a strict interpretation even today, or should it be a more living document, breathing, dynamic, changing with the times, which suggests that it is a dynamic document given the vagueness and the generality of the language in the document itself when it sets up our institutions. And one of the things that I pointed up to my sections yesterday is we got into a discussion briefly about a future presidential election. And I mentioned that at some point in our lifetime, we will have, hopefully, a female president. And one of the things that I pointed out, I pulled up the document and I said, well, here's Article 2, and this is who can become president under the document. And one of the things that I noted, or at least tried to point out, is, well, if you read the document, and if you strictly adhere to the document itself when it was written, and only adhere to the interpretation from that time frame, then women can't be president. Because if you watch, or at least read the language of Article 2, Article 2 specifically says and relates to he as president. So I'm like, well, can a woman become president? And most of them say, well, yeah, sure, of course they can. I'm like, well, wait a second. I mean, think about this and look at the document. Here's Article 2. There's no mention about women actually being allowed to become president because it is a gender-specific and a gender-specific pronoun. According to this document, men are supposed to be president, are they not? And they're like, oh, crap, that's true. And I go, well, we don't seem to adhere to the document. While we defend the document, there's still some aspects of the document that relate back to the time frame in which it was written, which goes back to Arendt. It's dynamic. So it needs to change and breathe with the time, depending on the social circumstances and what's happening in our society.
To
Yeah, and that's
oh, sorry, Chris, go on.
I was just gonna, and that's the point of one of the other institutions, namely the courts, right? Especially the Supreme Court, their job is to offer interpretations of this intentionally vague document.
Yes.
So, and in both cases, and once we get more specific and talk about education as an institution, defending institutions is all well and good on the viability of the assumption that those institutions are defending you.
Very,
And
well
and
put. Well
yeah,
put.
and arguably today, I think you can argue. Um, I think you can argue today that some aspects of our institutions actually are not defending us, even though
That's
we have directly elected them into office itself.
and that's the worry, right? And that's where I think Snyder's larger, more generic sense of tyranny comes in handy. That we're not talking about one evil guy. We're talking about the prospect of a tyrannical regime.
Yes. And to give credence to the dynamic of the Constitution, and and uh, and pushing back against this class of constitutionalists referred to as literalists, who don't believe it is a living document. We need to interpret the original text of the Constitution. I like to evoke for my students a quote from one of the founders that's not very well known, but was very prominent at the time. One of his chief contributions or suggestions to the Constitution that to create the structure of the government, he wanted not just a Department of War. Now it is officially still the Department of Defense, even though the current regime is referring it to the Department of War. But he said that we should have a Department of Peace, right? But anyway, in reflecting on the overall revolution, and reflecting on the Revolutionary War, he says the following, and I'll put this in the chat so people can follow along. Again, this is from Dr. Benjamin Rush. Um, Actually, it's not 1787, this quote, it's 1786. My apologies there, but the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the drama is closed, right? So he's comparing it to a play, right? It just doesn't stop at scene one. It's going to continue. There's going to be other acts. It remains yet established and perfect, our new forms of government, and to prepare the principles, morals, and manners of our citizens for these forms of government after they are established and brought to perfection. Right. So
See that, but that sounds like a lot of work.
it is a lot of work. This is probably the concerns of someone like Alexander Hamilton, who wanted to basically throne George Washington, who was highly skeptical of the demos. Very interesting guy, born in abject poverty. Typically, somebody who rises to power usually will defend the working class and those mired in poverty, but his attitude was, I grew up around those people. You don't want those people to have any access to government. But yeah, it's a dynamic, right? It's reciprocal. We do need to have these strong institutions. The people do need to be have some sort of check on them, as well as the institution, the instruments of and levers of power itself. But what that requires is that this is not being applied to robots. It's being applied to living human beings with emotional states and biological needs. And in order for those to be functional writ large for society, it requires people to have morals, ethics, and virtue. Is there anything you could say? Certainly, Renee, please contribute. But just from the pantheon of philosophers, is there anything to be said about that, Chris? Are there philosophers that really looked at the requisite ethics of individuals to sustain a democratic republic that is void
But
of tyranny?
yeah, it's a sine qua non that you have to be educated both intellectually and morally for this project to work at all. Yeah, Plato and Aristotle would give a very quick answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
And is
Let's, oh yeah, go on, Renee.
no, I'd say, and isn't the overall concept, or at least some of the theoretical, or at least the philosophical stuff that's related to, republicanism, and that only the elite members of society are supposed to be the natural leaders, or I don't want to say rulers, but the natural leaders for the nation to guide the nation. There's the social elite is supposed to work for the betterment or for the interest of the entire nation rather than a self-interest tact. And I guess that would kind of dovetail into individual ethics and accountability and so on. But you can't have that without a proper education, or at least a certain level of education.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and there, I think there's kind of a tension between what Plato and Aristotle both refer to as aristocracy, which is rule by the best, rule by the wisest, which on the face of it sounds great. But it's hard to find people that are that wise and that great. So the compromise appears to be in something like a well-formed polity. We could have these guardrails, and with a sufficiently morally striving population, this might work.
yeah. You know what I tell my students about that idea that yeah, only the wealthy should lead and keep out the working class, small farmers, and whatnot out, right? The to give grace to that perspective, it's well, they are educated. They're not going to rule from their stomach. They're going to rule from their mind, and they're going to not break the treasury. They're going to have long-term policies. Um, the the pushback on that is dealing with empathy. Empathy is based on one's lived experience, as far as I can tell. So if you are a person who has never opened up the cupboard and you're waiting for next week's paycheck and asking yourself, what am I going to do? Or driving down the road, looking at your gas tank getting to empty, right? If you don't have people who have that background in levers of power, you're going to have a society that only reflects the interest of the wealthy. And that is the surest way to get us to tyranny, because it's not that wealthy people are inherently evil and will become tyrannical. They just don't have the lived experience of having to work for a wage and wondering, how am I going to make this $100 last me a week? Because all I have left is just some bread, rice, and beans, and a screaming baby in the background, right? So it's something that I think this is where we do need to have across the board an education, not just acquiring knowledge, but of living a life that is in service to other people.
I think that's the key, because when we talk about the elites, I think there's a lot of ways of rendering that. But for both Plato and Aristotle, when they talk about the elites being in charge in an aristocracy, they're talking about literally the best people, the people who care about other people, and the people who know better than anyone else what people actually need.
Yeah, for my money, that's just too theoretical.
Sure.
I
Oh,
think almost by definition, you are, I'm sort of being hyperbolic here, but I think wealth does create sociopaths. You have the opportunity to isolate yourself from people. If somebody who's close to you is pointing at your flaws, it's very easy to dismiss that person, right? Um, and so you can surround yourself with yes men, and then you become reality then becomes distorted. And so, yeah, the best of the wealthy is never going to happen. They're always going to have flaws, just as somebody who is um, perhaps coming with a sense of urgency. I often joke with my students um, and I do let them know my political perspectives. Um, but what I do say to them is, if I got my wish list um, for everything in government, right? Universal health care, daycare, vacations, 1 year vacation, 1 year paternal, maternal leave. Well, that probably would perhaps destroy the treasury, right? It would overburden everybody in taxes. So we do need virtuous people who defend the working class, consumers, as well as we do need a viable party or a group, a faction of people that defend business interests as well. So we can come together and find common cause between these various interests.
And I think that that's the point for me that I hear echoed in Plato and Aristotle and Snyder, perhaps more theoretically in Plato and Aristotle, as Dr. Wilson is pointing out in the chat, uh, that there are these perversions of government always hinge on whether you're acting in the public good or in your own self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
And the self-interest, that this is not just a feature of tyranny, it's a feature of oligarchy, acting in the wealthy acting in the interest of their wealth, and in democracy. There's a perverse form of rule by the many where the many are really acting, voting from their stomachs.
Yeah, segregation is the crowning example within our nation's history.
Which is exactly, I mean, and this is the breeding ground for tyranny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's move on to lesson 1. And so I got a
Yes.
I've got a question for it, but we can feel free to play with this question. But basically the question is, lesson 1 is do not obey in advance. Right? So this highlights the concept of, and let me put it in the chat so people can follow along. Okay. This highlights the concept of anticipatory obedience as a critical factor in the rise of authoritarianism. From a philosophical and a historical perspective, what does this suggest about the nature of individual moral responsibility in the face of nascent, or rather entrenching, tyrannical power? And how might a philosophy of ethical actions address the psychological pressures that lead to such preemptive conformity? And uh, I'd like to hear your guys' responses to that question, and then I can point us to recent examples of anticipatory obedience from some of our major institutions.
Yeah, and I really like the way that Snyder highlighted this. I think he put it in terms like anticipatory obedience teaches power what it can get away with.
Mm-hmm.
That in a sense it's actually feeding the oppressive nature of a tyrant or a tyrannical regime.
Yeah, I was when I was reading the second chapter. I mean, I'm sorry, the second chapter, the first chapter, and I go down to 2/3 possibly in the chapter itself. And Snyder mentioned in 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. That particular chapter, at least that particular paragraph, and the SS took the initiative to devise the methods of mass killing without orders to do so. And they guessed what their superiors wanted and then demonstrated what was possible. And then I have a note on the side, and I just finished reading, which was a difficult read emotionally. I just finished reading Christopher Cox's work, The Light Withdrawn, which is the most recent biography on Woodrow Wilson. And the first thing that popped into my head was the punishments and that the women suffragists were experiencing at the hands of the Wilson administration. I mean, Woodrow Wilson himself didn't specifically write, well, we need to punish and get rid of these suffragists. He kind of set the stage for dissent and trying to limit and censor free speech by the suffragists. But it was the political appointees in various offices, both federally, and then it trickled down to local governance, where they basically acted on Wilson's suggestions, moved forward to try to implement what those individuals believed is what Wilson actually wanted. So it kind of, I think it kind of lends itself to the idea of anticipatory compliance. And this was just one example that was in my head first off about dissension, suppression of speech, and not just verbal, but in the case of the women's suffragists, it was more symbolic, and it was very, very unspoken. They were, and reason why they were called the Silent Sentinels. They didn't speak. They just unfurled banners that used Wilson's own words against him as a point of criticism, to publicize why the president was unwilling to support the federal amendment to give women the right to vote.
Yeah, and that was in the context of World War One, right? The latter half of the women's suffrage movement coincided with that. And we did definitely see a lot of anticipatory obedience with World War One. World War One was really unpopular with the American people, um, not just because, but largely due to Wilson running for his second term. His major campaign shtick was, "I kept us out of the war," referring to the Great War, later World War One, while Europe was killing each other. And then basically the United States banks had over leveraged themselves with our allies, mainly Great Britain, and uh, it looked like Germany was going to win the war. So, from an economic perspective, Wilson perhaps changed his mind and got the United States involved in it. But people went along with that, and it created a war hysteria. Right now that we have young men fighting abroad, people get fearful. They don't want their sons or fathers killed over there, and so the women's suffrage represented resistance, uh, not just a championing a specific cause for women's suffrage. And so the war hysteria was great, which is going to lend itself to not just them perhaps pulling back, which they didn't, but other people pulling back um, from exercising their First Amendment rights.
Yeah, I don't know if that really addresses or answers your question, but at least it was one of the things that really struck me about the second chapter about
Yeah,
No, but
anticipatory.
it did help me sort of hone back in on the question because when we're talking about anticipatory obedience, it's really a question of moral psychology. I think the way you've put this, Sean,
mhm.
and there's a couple different forms of anticipatory obedience. Those who are over complying in advance because they want to seek favor with, the tyrant or the tyrannical regime, and also those who over comply in advance because they want to stay off the radar of the aspiring tyrant or tyrannical regime. I think those are two different animals that both of which, lead to the same goal. There's a confluence of cause here.
Which you did want me to address this in a chat we were having yesterday, Chris, which we were contemplating, right? This coincided with Charlie Kirk's assassination, and people got quite emotional about that, and rightly so, right? I don't particularly agree with what Charlie Kirk said and did, but I can have empathy for people who had a great deal of respect for just that individual. But instead of just dealing with their own emotional state, they were leveraging power to silence those that were trying to point out what, from their own perspective, flaws and abuses of Charlie Kirk. And people were losing their jobs. A lot of educators lost their jobs, some of which posted things that were flagrantly rude. Some people were pretty dignified in their criticism. But either way, it doesn't matter. They were exercising their First Amendment right, and now their lives have been turned upside down for that anticipatory obedience, right? Maybe we shouldn't have this podcast on this particular subject. It might bring too much smoke. So let's tone it down a little bit. I didn't see us as retracting so much, but just to give pause to see how our institution, um,
Exactly.
what it thought, and would it defend our academic freedom and just our basic freedom of speech in order to inform ourselves and the greater community.
Yeah, I think we're still living in a moment in this country and maybe especially in this state where it's not entirely clear if our institutions of higher education will will defend and support us the way our policies on academic freedom say that they will. So yeah, and we see this across the board in higher education. You know, the various laws, both federal and state in Texas, about abolishing diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. A lot of institutions have overinterpreted that to mean we need to take the word diversity out of our catalog wherever it appears. We need to take diversity out of course descriptions wherever it appears. And that's not mandated by law anywhere, but that seems to me a clear example of anticipatory overcompliance, that maybe this is what the authorities want, so let's do that too. That the authorities might be offended by this kind of event or this kind of talk, so let's pause and cancel this one just in case.
And
Yeah,
and
Which is a strange kind of headspace to occupy, trying to guess and ascertain this is what they want or might not want.
it's yeah,
It makes you complicit in a really weird way, is what I'm trying to unpack here.
and I guess that the other question that I have is it complicit, or is it anticipatory compliance, or is it anticipatory dissent when a center for study changes its name to be a little bit more innocuous, you know?
Yeah,
Is that
you
dissent
can't,
or
I mean,
compliance?
the law says you can't use race as a condition for admissions or hiring. Okay, so we need to shutter the Center for Black Studies.
Yeah, and maybe not shutter, and I hate to, the UTRGV has recently renamed, I believe it's the Center for Mexican American Studies. They are now known as the Center for the Borderlands. So is that compliant? Is that dissent? Is that a little bit of both? Is it anticipatory
It's probably a
question?
little bit of both, because yeah, I think the next step, and we've seen legislators go down this road as well. You know, you can't use race or any proxy for race. So you can't have a DEI office or any of its kin, or under another name, an office that performs those functions. So I think there's a bit of dissent in maintaining the center as a center for borderlands, which is cool. But yeah, there's also
And
that
and and,
element.
and speaking of the weird headspace, I mean, I lay awake sometimes at night and it's hard to go to sleep, but it's not that it drives it, but you think the weird thoughts at 1, 2 in the morning, you know, when you wake up. And my other question, or at least as all the limitations on DEI and so on, like you talk about a weird headspace. And then my biggest question, I think, lately has been, well, how is this going to affect our speaker series here at South Texas College? How is that going to affect the name of our classes that we choose to deliver to our students here at South Texas College? How is this going to affect academic freedom and so on, the discussion points that we decide to have in our classes? So you can have a huge laundry list, and is it anticipatory compliance? Is it anticipatory dissent? Is it a little bit of both? It's that weird headspace, like you said, that keeps popping up overall.
Yeah. And it gets weirder on another axis to combine, you know, lessons 1 and lesson 2 in a way. It's institutions themselves can practice anticipatory overcompliance or anticipatory obedience. I mean, Sean's put some good stuff here in the chat, but we know, you know, what tyrants historically go after are the journalists, the professors, and the comedians.
Mm.
And those are all institutional. But if those institutions overcomply in an anticipatory way, what is the role of the individual comedians, professors, and journalists within those institutions?
Yeah, and where's the line between being a working professional and then a private citizen, and who draws that line on aspects of dissent? I mean, if I choose to go out and be involved in a No Kings protest, and if I happen to be caught on camera, and then that little video clip is shared with my classes or with the institution, will the institution view that as
Conduct unbecoming a history.
Unbecoming, exactly, exactly. So, yeah, like it's a very weird headspace. Number one, it's a very, I mean, free speech cuts both ways. I mean, there is free speech, but how is that defined and how is it legally interpreted and so on and so on.
Let me bring some levity to this to make this broader point of anticipatory obedience by referring to the scholastic work of 1979, I believe, George Lucas's Star Wars. Actually, this is from The Empire Strikes Back. Let's see what it looks like in a depiction within cinema. And make sure we've got some volume. Here we go. So this is Lando Calrissian on his little, who is governing his little sun or cloud city here. But here we go.
And Boba Fett.
Yes. Can you guys hear that?
No volume.
Lord Vader,
Oh, there.
There it is.
you may take Captain Solo to Jabba the Hutt after I have Skywalker. No good to be dead. He will not be permanently dead. Lord Vader, what about Leia and the Wookiee? They must never again leave this city. That was never a condition of our agreement, nor was giving hand to this bounty hunter. Perhaps you think you're being treated unfairly? Good. Deal's getting worse all the time.
All right. So just if anyone's unfamiliar with that movie, Lando had turned in his friend and colleague to curry favor with the Empire.
On the foothills of failed drag queen.
Sorry about that. To curry favor with the Empire, and now the deal has changed, right? Not only is Han Solo being tortured, and then he's going to be frozen to be delivered to the ring pin of the bounty hunters, Jabba the Hutt. Now, other friends of Lando, Princess Leia and Luke, are going to be basically imprisoned under Lando's charge, and now Lando is realizing that, oh, I obeyed in advance, and now I see the face of transactions, right? And now it's the camel is under the tent, and I'm basically enslaved to this guy. You saw his posture kind of go down too. It's a classic scene. Let me open the chat here again. Here we go. You guys hearing me okay?
Yeah, we're hearing you all right.
Okay. So yeah, in the chat, I've put in various institutions that have obeyed in advance, right? Law firms that are providing pro bono legal services for administrations aligned causes. So I've provided 9 firms there that are doing this, right? To avoid the scrutiny of them, and also, hey, here's a little thing I can do for you. And then you've got companies. I think the one that we saw that was both disturbing and inspiring was ABC firing Jimmy Kimmel for telling some rather innocuous jokes about the current president. And he was let go. And what was amazing about that is we saw people vote with their dollars. We saw millions and millions of people canceling their Disney prescriptions, app prescriptions, and as well as with ABC as well. And lo and behold, ABC said, hey, Jimmy, why don't you come back and get your job back, right? So if anybody is out there listening to this and thinking all hope is lost, absolutely not, right? We do have leverage. We do have a lot of power. The fact that I think Snyder is giving us a clue with this chapter, do not obey in advance. That's kind of pointing the fact that where is the power derived from? It derives from us. So if we're willing to give over our power, well, then probably we deserve to be oppressed. Probably we do not deserve to have access and to express our inalienable rights. But if we do feel that we deserve this, and we are entitled to it by virtue of our existence, we've got a lot of power. And unfortunately, that power requires courage. And that's something I would like to see either of you guys touch on, or anybody in the chat, or anybody who wants to open up their mic. There's a paradox with courage because it often gets superseded by self-preservation, right? I want to live, or I just want to have a barbecue with my family, right? I want to continue making a lot of money. I want access to power. But courage, it's I think we're used to seeing lots of movies out there that depict courage where it all works out in the end. I think more of us need to watch Cormac McCarthy films, or read his books at the very least, to see how sometimes it doesn't work out in the end for an individual. But if somebody is willing to put themselves forward in service to people who maybe not be able to defend themselves, this is how change is going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that gets pretty quickly to a classic, maybe the classic ethical question in ancient Greek philosophy. And I think we can pose this for individuals as well as for institutions. How much of your virtue, how much of your meaning are you willing to sacrifice in order to preserve your existence? And institutionally, it becomes a question of, okay, how much of your mission are you willing to betray so that you can still exist to do whatever remains of your mission?
And I think the basic problem we have been enduring for the last probably 500 years is with the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is something we must value. It is something we must cherish. It is basically to distill all of the variables of the Enlightened philosophers' arguments and contributions. Basically, they were saying the worth has individual. Sorry, I got that wrong. The individual has worth, right? And power, people have sovereignty, not the state, not the government, right? The government derives its sovereignty from the will of the people. But the problem with the Enlightenment is it was based solely on reason. And that puts us, if we approach it that, we're in our heads. And so earlier I said that there's a dichotomy between people who rule from their stomach and people who rule from their heads. There's also another option. You have to lead from your heart. Now, it doesn't mean you only lead from your heart. It is aligning your heart with your mind, right? You lead, your mind is led by your heart. And I think the crowning example of somebody who only led with his head was John Locke, right? John Locke, his writings are directly attributed to our Declaration of Independence, but yet he was one of the chief investors of the African Slave Company of 1872, which was there to furnish enslaved people from West Africa and the Caribbean to the colonists. And he was also the author of the South Carolinian Charter, colonial charter, that charter specifically designed South Carolina to be a slave society. So leading with the heart is the difficulty of this is there are no guarantees with it, and in fact, it often does not work out for the individual who chooses to navigate this insane world as such.
Yeah, and that's where things get incredibly complex for something like legislation or institutions. How do you codify or articulate, how to lead from the heart? That
Yeah, well, you can't legislate that,
I,
but
and I'm not even sure you can articulate it explicitly. I mean,
no, that's
that's
why.
the sphere of discursive reason.
Yeah, that's why people who write about this often do it metaphorically and poetically. We're talking about ineffable concepts that can't just be said straightforward, because it's dealing
And
straightforward with our mortality.
yeah, and then we run into the huge problem because tyranny is defined as somebody acting in their self-interest rather than in the interest of the public or the common good. What happens when you have an ostensibly tyrannical regime for whom many of the public think they're acting in my interest.
Mm.
It,
Yeah.
it becomes a bit subjective, tyrant or not tyrant.
Yeah, and that plays into, well, it requires the individual to inform themselves and to carefully examine their own personal interests and how those interests align to uh, not so much the national interest, but just your community. How do my personal interests align to people in my household?
Yeah.
And then from there, how does it align to people in my community? And from there, the state, and then from there, perhaps the nation.
Yeah, and that's the work of empathy, the real work, because to to refer to something as the common good or the public good, what is that exactly? Is that the one good that crosses all people, or is it some aggregate of several goods? But that's approaching it intellectually. I think when you approach it empathetically, that's where you really start to sort of, okay, this is what we mean by the public good. What's good for the public, which is us.
Yeah. And on a personal note, and even on an intellectual note, when one does lead reason from the heart, one is never going to make a mistake in their life. It's just not going to happen, right? Things might not turn out well for you. They
Right.
often don't. Ask Jesus. Um, but you're not going to go to your deathbed going, man, I should have led with reason, right? You're going to be like, wow, I was there for my family. I was there for my students. I was there for my colleagues. What a great life. Even if your death is violent and it is, but if it's in service of love, you've lived a good life. Um, Now we're at 11:30. I definitely would like to keep talking. This is slated till 12 noon, but I also would like to invite anybody out there to open up their mics, to ask questions or to contribute or to basically point out things that we are not pointing out that are pertinent to these two lessons.
Yeah, and I think I'll just give a shout out. Jenny Chamberlain has a great nod in the chat. The very idea of a common good is ripe for appropriation by tyrants because it's so difficult and complex to define.
Yeah, because it's just a matter of efficiency.
Yeah, you
Because
must allow me to do these things because it's in the interest of the common good, and I must do them now.
yeah, because that's the problem of democracy.
Yep.
It's greatly inefficient, right? It takes a long time to get change because there are so many people with different individual interests, and they often can collide with each other. And so, I mean, this is the rise of the Nazis. You had in the 1920s, Germany was a democratic society. And speaking of Plato, what does Plato say about democracy and noise? Maybe you can touch on that, Chris.
Well, for Plato, democracy is almost the worst form of government. It's
Hmm.
it's barely a form of quote unquote government. That
Hmm.
it's ruled by the mob. It's well, when everyone has a voice, it's nothing but noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And messy and very, very messy,
Yeah.
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I often show my students in 1301, the first two episodes of the John Adams series put out by HBO. And in that, when they're depicting a scene when England is trying to enforce the Tea Act, and there's this confrontation between John Hancock and this one individual, this poor individual who's trying to enforce it. And the guy asks, "Who are you?" Because John Hancock is saying, "I'm not going to unload this tea. This is the king's foul brew, and you guys are trying to subject us to a monopoly." And the guy asks, "Well, what is your name?" And he says, "It's John Hancock, ship owner." And the guy says, "Not John Hancock, smuggler." And he says to him, "Shame on you." And then the crowd grabs him up and they tar and feather him. And witness to this is also Sam Adams and John Adams. And Sam Adams has got a big smile on his face as this guy's being stripped naked, tars being thrown on him, feathers. And John Adams is basically saying, "Shame on you, Sam. Do you support this? Do you support this? Do you support the brutal and illegal acts to support a political principle? Do you support that?" And basically what John Adams is reacting to is the tyranny of the mob, the tyranny of the demos, which definitely can be a problem. But what gets lost is that people aren't, as John Locke would point, people are naturally good. But when people are oppressed and denied material goods in the face of concentrations of wealth at the top, yeah, you should expect people to act in unethical and compromised ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
So,
see, I can throw out another question that I had.
Well, I was just going to say, Sean, that I mean,
Yeah.
that raises another interesting question that in fighting tyranny, does this suggest that the opponents of tyranny always, so to speak, have to fight with one arm tied behind their back?
The opponents of tyranny to fight. No, absolutely not. But they do need to understand that they have a different type of power, right? It's not obvious power. It's not the power of the gun. It's not the power of mass amounts of wealth. It's the power of love, right? It is. Let me bring this up while I'm formulating this thought. Um, Birmingham, desegregation images. Here we go. Images. Oh shoot. I'm sorry. I should have had this up because it's a classic example. But what I'm trying to bring up, the woman's name was Hazel Brown, and Elizabeth Eckert is who's in this image. But it's when Little Rock is being desegregated, and you have this young 14-year-old girl who is African American holding her school books with a mob behind her. And there's one woman, Hazel Brown, who has this tremendous ugly face. She's doing that. You know damn well what she's saying. And this young girl is surrounded by other women, and behind the women is the National Guard. It's just this big mess. And that went viral before viral was a meme, right? It was a concept. It was shown over. It made the international press. And what was interesting about that is it's just such a great juxtaposition of someone with dignity, a 14-year-old girl who is not reacting at all to the crowd, people surrounding her being menacing, and then the crowd, which has zero dignity. And Hazel Brown was deeply embarrassed by this. And she ended up becoming a civil rights activist and apologized to the young woman and to her family, right? She was brought up that way. Everyone she loved and trust told her that white supremacy was real. It wasn't just a thought. And by proxy, anyone else who was not white was not just politically inferior or economically inferior, but biologically inferior. And she was embarrassed by her face that she was making and the words that she was using, and it softened her heart. And I think that is the power that the demos has. Maintain your dignity. And just approach people that are perceived as enemies as people who are just lost. They don't understand. They think that they seem to think that they're going to take some of this wealth, power, and status with them when their mortal coil is detached from them. But I think people who fully embrace their mortality and realize that TikTok time is limited, and the purpose of this is not to accumulate status, power, and wealth. The purpose of this is to look around and see who needs help and then help them without any anticipation of appreciation. It's nice if it happens, but it's not the currency of it.
Yeah, which you know full well I appreciate the sentiment, but absolutely cannot be legislated.
No, this is beyond legislation, but you can have legislation that reflects that, right? You can have legislation that reflects that. You can have legislation that does appreciate the fact that there are certain industries that have a perverse profit motive: healthcare, education, prisons, private prisons, and create legislation that addresses the fact that how much money are you willing to pay if you are diagnosed with cancer? You're going to mortgage your home. You're going to mortgage your children's future to protect yourself, and your family is going to insist that you do that. And so what does it say about a society, an American society that is unique in the fact that we are the only people in the industrialized world that has something called medical bankruptcy?
Yeah, and then we get into the thick of it, right? Because if we have, a political regime teetering on the edge of or leaning towards tyranny, and our journalistic institutions, our networks, our institutions of higher education are teetering on the verge of or tending in the direction of anticipatory obedience, uh, yeah, we're in some real trouble.
Yes, we are, but personally, I'm empowered by it, right? I'm grateful for our current president. I'm grateful for the people he surrounded for him, because it helped me realize that, yeah, the Constitution isn't just this document that was created by a bunch of wise people who were stroking their beards and going, "Yes, we did it," right? Um, but we have to recognize the value of this and participate in it, and use any kind of virtue, morals, or ethics that we have been able to cultivate in our pathetic little lives, and infuse these institutions, not just the Constitution. South Texas College is an institution. This could be a terrible institution, but it is not, because everybody I run across here, whether it is the custodians, whether it is the department secretaries, whether it is the administration, the faculty, the students, everybody is here because they want to be here. And all I see when I walk around is love. And that love, I mean, you can't have policies that say, "Thou will love everybody here. You better, or you are fired," right? Love doesn't work that way. But the policies reflect that sentiment that is the currency of our very existence. We do not live by just eating and drinking. We eat love. So give it
I think
freely.
it looks like Jenny wants to play.
Play,
I
Jenny.
do. I do.
All right.
One thing that and I am so all in the importance of being willing to stand, being willing to speak out, being willing to not comply preemptively. But at the same time, I think especially for our students who are in such vulnerable positions, the importance of also teaching principles of uniting and principles of protecting themselves, and not, because like one of the, even the example you gave with the civil rights, if there had not been the media to catch those images, if there
Exactly.
had not been the National Guard there to protect her, she would have been killed. And who knows how many hundreds and even thousands of African Americans who spoke up over 100 years were killed because the eyes of the nation and the eyes of the world were not on them. And so we do need to be willing to speak up, but we need to be united. We need to work together. And I think the power of South Texas College, and why I love it being here, just like you've talked about, Sean, people are here because we feel this purpose. We feel this connection. We feel that this is a way of giving back. It's more than a paycheck. It's making lives better. It's improving the lives of people who have long been neglected. But also people who are incredibly vulnerable. I know, well, we all know people who are afraid to even go to the grocery store right now. And so what do we do? And then my students who also have been talking for years about, the Illuminati and how this is all a conspiracy. And we're finding that there are conspiracies that are very real by people who are in positions of power. So maybe we need to also conspire on how we can strengthen and help and protect. I hope you see where I'm going with this, but anyway.
No, that's bang on. And to connect to what I think is an analogy, probably not as severe, but at least as important. I was the one who, advised Sean and Renee to hit pause on this presentation until we arrived at such a place where I felt confidence in the institution of South Texas College. So and I think I told Sean, you might remember this. right now I need you more as a history faculty than I do as a martyr. And it's not clear that you wouldn't become one.
Absolutely. It's, you know, we are running that risk right now, although I'm very confident in the response of the board and the administration and legal counsel. They only have so much power, right? And funding is funding, right? So this is a risk. And thank you, Jenny. Yes, it's one thing to be resolute in your values, but we have to be sensitive to the people around us. And one can take examples from history and saying, I'm going to do it, but you cannot endanger other people. You have to protect other people around you. But
And nobody is ever able to do it by themselves either.
yes, no.
And I've learned that the hard way in a couple times in past years.
Mm-hmm.
Every
But
every
that gets to the heart of the power of the demos, the power of the people, and where our power is. It's not in guns, it's not in mass wealth, it's in each other.
I, I try to emphasize to my classes, especially during election year cycles or just elections in general. I try to emphasize that my role or our role as faculty, on a personal level, my role as a faculty member is not to tell people how to vote. My role is to engage, or at least try to encourage our students in our classes that they should vote. And I personally don't care what an individual's politics are, right, left, center, extreme, one way or the other. Your beliefs and your ideas and concepts are yours. But what I do care about is that our students engage, they defend an institution. That institution is the act and the practice of voting on a regular and consistent basis. And then I bring up data or show that your vote does count, and it does matter. It doesn't matter that you live out in the middle of nowhere, and if you're only one of 2,000 people in a county that votes, but all those votes, they add up. And so even here in the Valley, we're a larger metropolitan area, but voting and participating in the process is probably the most important thing to do as an individual in the Republic as it exists currently.
And
Speaking of which, voting is happening right now. So if you happen to be on campus, go on over to the student union and vote.
Yeah, to both of you, I mean, this is classic, academic freedom 101, right? But on the other hand, consider the political climate we're in right now. How far of a stretch would it be for me, donning my tyrant hat, to accuse Renee of political activism by encouraging his students to vote, given the voting patterns writ large of college students and college age students? I mean, we see people are trying to strip colleges of being polling stations for overtly political reasons. So at what point does even encouraging a certain demographic to vote itself become an overtly activist political act in the eyes of the regime?
Which is another slide, another step, another slide into that really dangerous territory, that area. And it's like, whoa, wait a second, wait a minute,
Yeah, and I think that's
what I would say to that is,
we're on a slide, and we're trying to find our footing on this slide.
Yeah.
That is worth the risk too. That is
agree.
absolutely worth the risk. If I am terminated by simply encouraging students to vote, not what to vote for, but to vote, and that leads to termination, then obviously there's something else for me to do in this world. There's people out there that didn't register to vote, are not eligible to vote, or are afraid to be in public spaces to vote, to Jenny's point, and are maybe wondering, well, where do I participate in this revolution? And what I would say to that, and this applies to everybody, the revolution starts in your home. And again, what is our weapon? Our weapon is to be of service. So particularly if you live in a household where somebody is carrying the burdens of upholding that household, take out the garbage, clean the dishes, vacuum, right? Ask, how can I love you better today, to the person that is running is steering the ship. That is where the revolution starts. And from there, you are going to see a home that truly is made of the fabric of love. And that is you're going to carry that with you into the community. And that is, fear is very contagious, but so is love and by proxy, courage. Well, we are basically about 5 minutes from end time. Please give how about we do this? Just give your last thoughts on reflecting on what was discussed here, including you, Jenny, and then we can conclude this discussion so I can go vote.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that this is the first of what would be several of these.
Well, there's 20 lessons, so we've got 9 more podcasts to go. I have a tentative one with Dr. Wilson,
Awesome.
and any colleagues that might be out there right now, include hint, Jenny, or anybody who might come across this from the recording, please do hit me up. You know how to get a hold of me. I would be more than happy to go through this. We've got plenty of time, and I get the sense that this book will somehow remain relevant for several semesters to come.
Yeah, this will send a while. And if none of the other philosophers end up asking for it, once you get to the lesson on truth, you can have me back, because that's something that we've podcasted about before in other contexts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think just to wrap up, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. I hope that the contributions were positive, at least that I had for the group. And I hope to see the continuation through the rest of the chapters themselves. And if you'd like me back, I'd be more than happy to consider it. And
Absolutely.
if nobody else pops in, I'll be more than willing to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is what academic historians do, right? Let's look at lessons from the past. Does this rhyme? Does this history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes? Somebody once said. Do these events rhyme with anything today?
I'd like to just say that this has definitely motivated me. I only heard about it yesterday, but it has definitely motivated me to read the book, and I'm planning to go and buy both copies.
Yeah, this is a great. This is the one I prefer, just because it's
Yeah.
a little bit more stimulating, and that the art is very relevant to the lessons.
I definitely want to go and get that. And I do want to say, just as a note of both encouragement, caution, and hope, I think it's important for our students and for ourselves to know that we are never alone, that reach out, look for people who are trying to help, like Mr. Rogers says, or did say, but look for the helpers, look for people, reach out, talk to people. We can build coalitions. Know that you don't have to take it on by yourself, because you can't, but there are people who will back you. There are people who are going to support you, and there can be people who can guide you and give you options for ways that you can move forward with what you believe to be some of the most important steps you can take. Because although martyrs definitely have a place, we need people to stay around. We need people in it for the long haul. We need people who can give each other comfort and help and courage. And just as Sean was saying, love, and knowing that although it's scary times, together we don't have to be afraid.
No.
In the end, there's really nothing to be afraid of. These people are ill-formed. There's a lot of arrested development going on, I suspect, with these people. They are wounded children caught in adult bodies. They need love and compassion, but that isn't just smiling at them and embracing them. That is holding them to account in any subtle way, direct way, and in any kind of mass way.
Well, and that's where it requires, I mean, in addition to the heart, it requires an incredible amount of intelligence to be able to navigate those types of modalities and strategies and tactics.
I would push back on that. Definitely intelligence comes into play, but I think to the extent that intelligence does come into play, again, at the risk of being too earnest here, I think intelligence is fortified by the heart.
Oh, sure, certainly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just cleverness or something.
Yeah. Well put. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I can add something, because I would love to be involved in the future, I regularly teach an entire chapter on war, terrorism, and the balance of power, and what are common tactics for people who want to take over and create an entirely new regime.
Oh,
So,
then just once you get the Snyder, wait till one of the lessons hits you, and it will.
okay.
That'll be the Jenny Chamberlain episode.
You know what? Just as a closing note for me, and I promise I won't say anything else, but chapter 9, I think, is his most important chapter. Oh, no, not chapter 9. Chapter 12. Make eye contact and small talk. And there's a lot of meat in that chapter, as simple as the message is.
And we've been living that lesson right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even though our eye contact is virtual, I'm seeing your eyes.
Well, thanks for putting this on, Sean. I'm looking forward to the
My
rest of it.
pleasure. And yeah, hit me up. We'll do this again. So
And thanks
Thank you,
for
everyone.
I'm putting my
Thank you.
shoes on to go vote right now.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. Have a good
Take
day.
care. See you, Michael. Thank you for being here. Hey, Laura. Thank you for being here. Hit me up, Michael, when you get a chance. If you want to participate in a discussion, you're more than welcome. Nice. All right. Take care, guys.